This guy Wamsley said, yeah, protesters have targeted the site and the employees who work there since early June. It's like 4 months. They were upset about 4 hours. And again in September, ICE officers reported vehicles following them after they left the ICE facility, following them home. On September 1, as the calendar continues, protesters assembled a guillotine. Thus, the district court discounted most of the evidence all the way from June through September. Just wrote it all off. These judges are such scammers, man. Major victory in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Been waiting for this one because we've already had some other victories with Gouveia in California, but now we went up north a little bit to Portland, Oregon. And in Portland, Oregon, we had a lower level judge that said, Trump, you can't deploy the National Guard anywhere. Who do you think you are, the president? You want to bring people in here and clean up the streets and stop them from attacking ICE officials at federal buildings and other locations? Well, that is not appropriate here because it's a sanctuary city and we run our city. And if we want illegal alien criminal gangbangers flowing all over the place, we're free to do that. But now the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has come down. And this, of course, was the state of Oregon, the city of Portland, and a bunch of blues suing Trump and Hegseth and the National Guard. And now we're going to see some uniformity on this. And the question, of course, is, oh, perfect. We're in the Ninth Circuit. This is over on the west coast of the United States. But what happens when this thing, it sort of bounces around and we're in Chicago and we're in all these other places that are also filing lawsuits on the same basis, saying Trump can't declare what's going on in our states? Well, now the Ninth Circuit has 2 decisions that are very persuasive, and there will be more coming. So the Supreme Court at some point may need to come in here and clean this up. But here is what the decision says. Now, per curiam from the judges, the main takeaway, Trump's motion is granted. Nice to see that. And so the lower level judge said, get the National Guard out of here. Trump said, can you please stay that lower judge's decision? They said, yes, we can. Here's why. They give us a long list of background details, factual background and procedural history. Look at this list of insurrection all day, every day, day after day, month after month. They write from the court, in the days and months leading up to the federalization that happened here, the order from the president, there's been a lot of events at ICE facilities. Now, while many of these events have been peaceful, others have been violent and even deadly. Really? People are dying? Wow. I wonder if they're going to give somebody a state funeral like they did for George Floyd or something like that. No, they don't, because they say Trump is the one who is doing the attacking. But now ICE people are shooting their own people outside facilities in Texas. For example, on September 24th, there was a shooting at an ICE facility in Dallas. 1 detainee was killed and 2 others were seriously injured. On September 26th, 2 days later, over 200 protesters blocked access, 200 people, to a gate at an ICE facility in Chicago. And these people are being lauded as heroes. And one of the protesters was apprehended with a gun in his possession. Now, since June this year, there have been regular protests at the Lindquist Federal Building, an ICE facility in Portland, which is issue in this case. Some of these protests have been peaceful, but many have turned violent, and protesters have threatened federal law enforcement officers and the whole building. And you're going to see there's a bunch of these declarations, these DECL declarations. This one's from Wamsley, this one's from Dobson, and there's a bunch of people saying, yes, court, yes, they're trying to kill us. Yes, they're trying to burn our building down. Yes, they've got battering rams and so on. This guy Wamsley said, yeah, protesters have targeted the site and the employees who work there since early June. It's like 4 months. They were upset about 4 hours. Based on its internal risk assessments, the Portland Police Bureau, the PPB, we're going to see a lot of them, they activated the crowd management commanders and their RRT, their rapid response teams. They did that on June 11th through the 25th, just as a precautionary measure. They had to activate their resources. That's indicative that maybe there's a conflict on their streets, right? Now, here, the Portland police, they made 25 arrests between June 11 and the 19th. So 25 people, even they acknowledged they had to round up. Court says there was another person, Wamsley, who said, as a result of the destruction that was caused by these protesters and threats to the building, we were forced to close the facility for more than 3 weeks. From June 13th to July 7th, had to close the whole building down, inoperable. You can't deport people in ICE facilities and utilize that facility if it's closed. This significantly impeded operations, said Wamsley. Now, while the facility is again currently operational, the windows on the buildings are boarded to prevent further damage to property or attempts at incursions and to provide security for the people inside. But when they went in to Portland, the city said, sorry, you can't have wood coverings on the windows. You'd have to take the windows down so that our illegal alien violent protesters, so-called insurrectionists, so that they can come and kill you through the windows. You can't put boards on there. Who do you think you are? On June 8th, protesters placed wood, rocks, and a traffic barrier to impede the operations. On June 11th, they're just walking us through the days. On June 11th, a man set fire to various materials that the protesters compiled to a barricaded vehicle gate, and other protesters added to the pile of materials, increasing the flames, trying to smoke them out. They then placed a pole against the main lobby entrance. Then on June 19th, a serious incident occurred. A group of protesters, including one dude with a firearm, they went up the driveway of the ICE facility. They threw rocks and sticks at the guards and fired M80 fireworks at these officers. Protesters threw a mortar at the front entrance of the building, injuring an officer, and FPF officers had to extinguish 2 fires in the front of the building. Officers were forced to barricade themselves inside the building, and protesters placed chains on the exterior doors so that when they burn the building down, they can't leave. That is like straight terrorism. We saw that out of places like Mumbai. Remember those mall attacks or those attacks in the theaters where they barricade the doors in and just walk around inside shooting everybody? Eventually, the protesters attempt to breach the front door and broke the front door's glass. Officers from Portland were then forced to deploy long guns, but they didn't use them. Protesters continued to throw mortars at the building. Now, the Border Patrol Tactical Unit, the BORTAC, they deployed an armored tactical vehicle to the building, and working with an ICE Special Response Team, they eventually pushed protesters back to the street. 3 protesters were arrested and charged with assaulting a federal officer. That's it. 3 protesters barricading you in a building and then setting stuff on fire. How is that not attempted murder or terrorist attack? On June 24th, again, just walking through the calendar, protesters attempted to set a U.S. flag on fire in the driveway. Later, another protester attempted to light an incendiary device next to the guard shack. When officers approached the protester, she threatened them with knives. Protesters also poured a substance like motor oil on the vehicle entrance. On June 24th, one protester shot officers with a paintball gun. After a Portland officer warned protesters, another one is shining lasers in their eyes, which can blind you. The same night, another protester was arrested for assaulting an officer with a machete and a knife. All 3 protesters were charged with assault on a federal officer, and that's it, out of like hundreds or thousands. On June 29th, another individual tampered with the building access card reader, and he was arrested. He resisted arrest by biting and kicking the officers who took him into custody. 3 card readers were vandalized in June, replacements coming soon. While the card readers are inoperable, then employees are delayed. They can't do security. People coming in and out can't figure out who's who. And while they're delayed, the protesters are doxing the officers. They're out there snapping photos of people and their family members, many of them waving foreign flags around, because this is obviously an invasion and an attack against the responsive forces. We got invaded. We have a counter reaction. Our men and women in the federal government right now against these sanctuary states are the counter attack. The invasion was attack 1. Counter attack is deportation. So now they're counter attacking back. For months, ICE officers have been the targets of doxing. They go after their families because these people are nuts. On several occasions since June, protesters have followed officers who have been deployed in Portland back to their hotels, and groups have protested at the hotels. Several ICE officers at their offices had their names, photographs, home addresses publicly all shared, threatening messages across the board. Multiple Portland ICE officers have had unknown individuals appear at their residence, peering into their homes and recording officers coming and going. On July 4th, ICE officers observed several individuals defacing ICE with graffiti. When ICE attempted to apprehend them, one ran towards an officer and kicked him, causing him to fall. Another threw an incendiary device towards the officers, which detonated near the officers. It's like, do these people even know what they're doing? Like, it's attempted murder of cops throwing incendiary devices at them. And the Portland cops are all just kind of like, well, it's peaceful protest. The U.S. Attorney's Office charged 22 people, and those numbers are nothing, on June 13th and July 8th with offenses committed at the ICE facility. Tons of offenses, destructive devices, depredation of government property. In June, a man was also arrested for a laser pointer. Now, protesters regularly attempt to impede government vehicles constantly. When a vehicle stops, protesters surround it. They shout threats. One example, on August 9th, a group of protesters became aggressive when an ICE vehicle was leaving the facility, and they began beating the vehicle, striking it with their fists. A Portland officer had to use pepper balls to push the protesters away, and again in September, ICE officers reported vehicles following them after they left the ICE facility, following them home. On September 1, as the calendar continues, protesters assembled a guillotine. It's official. Some federal agents set up a guillotine on January 6th. They don't even know who did it, as far as I know. Maybe they know now. I don't think. Does anybody know? Let me know if you know. I don't think I know. And they said that was an insurrection. So I guess this is an insurrection. That one only lasted 4 hours and was set up by the feds after the pipe bombs distracted all the cops, and Nancy Pelosi refused to do anything about it after Stephen Summer was like, Nancy, 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 Nancy. And 2 protesters protesters wielded riot shields. This incident and others were also recorded in multiple emails. Even the Portland officers are reporting their activities. On September 1, the groups of protesters at the facility ranged from 40 to 200 people at different times of the day, just taking shifts. ICE agents did several push-outs, arrested a few. That night, ICE agents made and deployed gas to clear the front of the building and to move the vehicles. September 2nd was uneventful. 20 of the usuals were back. September 3rd, a person illegally flying a drone was also arrested, and he reacted violently. There were about 20 people there that day. Then, on 9/4, a Portland officer reported seeing several homeless people being coerced into approaching the ICE facility. Wow. They're just taking homeless people and they're like, here, take this fifth of vodka and just, walk right up there. The instigators told these people they should create a distraction or just rattle the gate. Go up there, I'll buy you a 40. Go rattle that gate and beat those officers. Officers confirmed this was happening. They watched the instigators escorting different older homeless people up to the gate. That's not very communistic, is it? Well, I guess each according to their needs, they need these homeless people, so they just shove them up there. Not very compassionate. Portland police took custody of an elderly man after he asked if he could just come up to the gate and rattle it so that the Antifa instigators would leave him and others alone. They're threatening me. They want me to come up here and shake your gate. Otherwise, they're just going to harass me in my corner over here. He was escorted behind the gates and interviewed. He told agents that he and several other homeless people were being coerced to instigate agent response. Sick. Then, also on that day, Portland arrested a woman described as, quote, a daily chronic problem. Oh gosh, we have a lot of those in America. Who is very aggressive and was believed to be armed with a Glock. She has made threats to ICE agents and she has expended her 3 strikes at the facility. We give them 3 strikes? That's really nice. According to one officer, she's been arrested many times and can be very, very violent. Then on September 6th, there were 50 to 60 very active protesters at the gate. There was a lot of noise, flashing lights, swinging sticks. Portland was pushing out to allow vehicles to enter, and other police observed 50 people in the driveway. FPS had 26 officers on duty. They were outnumbered. On September 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, Portland officers again reported groups of protesters ranging from 7 to 30 people with low energy, just like Jeb Bush had. Some dressed in all black, one with a baton, but otherwise no issues, just out there standing around. On September 9, multiple individuals were observed on 4 occasions shining high-powered flashlights at vehicles leaving the building. Those like million candle watt, they got some burners out there, man. Million candle watt right through your windshield as you're an ICE agent driving out. Isn't that nice? Day after day, repeated. Different tactics. In second weeks of September, ICE received multiple reports that drivers leaving the ICE facility were temporarily blinded or disoriented after individuals shined high-powered lights at their vehicles. Again, on September 9th, screenshots were captured of threats on social media to murder the ICE officers. Someone posted, "That ain't nothing but a target practice. Execute Gestapo on site," said another post. "Off the pigs," said another post. This is their ideology. This is who they are. On September 12th, protesters also photographed an unmarked government vehicle as it was leaving and gave the location on social media. September 12th, 8 to 10 protesters, but a vehicle arrived and unloaded a large quantity of sticks and bats. And it was unknown if they were gearing up for Sunday night or to just resupply. It feels like half measures to me. And unfortunately, it's all it is sticks and bats. But do you think you're just going to go beat officers? And that's not, I don't know, maybe they get away with it. Well, if you beat them 4 times, not 3 strikes of beating, it's no problem. But the 4th time, then they get mad and put your name on a list. Hughes said the same. Now, on September 13th, there were 40 to 50 people at the facility. Someone had a green laser. Then Portland increased the number of its officers. They had not determined why the bats and sticks were being delivered. Well, maybe, I don't know, it's baseball season? Are they going to play some cricket? On September 15th, 16th, and 17th, there were groups 10 to 50 people. Some were very energetic, so Jeb Bush was not there. On September 18th, the afternoon started with 150 plus. Then later, 50 to 60 of the normal people. They screamed and threw objects at the Portland police. And notice this, a lot of this is about Portland, right? So it's like, you guys cannot solve this. Day after day, it's like, you guys have been doing this for months now. So Portland, obviously, we're going to need some National Guard in here. They screamed, and one officer said there does appear to be a large camp that was set up, even though they cleaned it out earlier in the day. Clear it out, come on, right on back. So Portland, you can't handle it. On September 19th, Homeland Security investigations. They got a tip that someone was going to detonate a bomb at the ICE facility. Now, although the threatened attack did not occur, preparing for that diverted important agency resources, just like they did on January 6th with the pipe bombers. Now, Portland officers summarized the situation. He said, well, FPS agents were busy. What? We were busy. That night, there were 50 protesters, again, throwing objects, running at cars. FPS also reported black blockers assaulting people, and they provided another video of a black blocker assaulting a journalist journalist with a large sword or stick. What is a black blocker? I don't know. There was a disturbance outside the building that day, and they deployed munitions to break up the crowd. Then again, September 20th, another 50 people. They were more agitated that night. There was a disturbance involving protesters and counter-protesters, and then again, one disturbance, a protester pepper sprayed someone else, one black blocker. What are those? Like a lineman? On September 25th and 26th, there were between 10 to 20 protesters, sometimes yelling at police, sometimes minimally active. On the 27th, another 50 to 60, most of them blocking things, dressed in block with helmets, masks, and other PPE. So FPS requested assistance from the PPB to get vehicles out. They had resources to clear the driveway, but they were shining bright lights at them. And again, Portland did not assist because the officers thought the request might conflict with their previous directions to not assist with the facilitating of the moving of vehicles in and out of the facility. Interesting. So Portland police, if it's like helping move an illegal alien at all in the building or out of the building, they don't, nope, sorry, it's not our jurisdiction. You deport your own illegals. PPB did not have the resources to accomplish this. They even admit it, right? So saying they could not handle a crowd of this size and demeanor. It's great. Court is saying perfect. Thanks for admitting that. Trump is saying thank you. Perfect. That's why we needed the National Guard, because you guys couldn't handle it, or you wouldn't handle it. Couldn't or wouldn't. On the 28th, after the announcement of the federalization order, then Trump says, all right, look, we're coming in. There were 30 to 200 protesters outside the ICE facility. On September 28th, after the announcement, we're coming in. Portland attempted to de-escalate the conflict several times, made 2 arrests, but they did not provide traffic control resources, didn't want to help because of the confrontational nature of the individuals at the facility, right? They're too mean for us, so we're just going to let them do what they're doing. Wild. Cops. The static nature of the event, and there were a couple of confrontations, and so we don't want to do anything. Then on September 29th, another FPS Portland officer had to deploy a pepper spray fogger against a protester who would not leave. Later, they warned protesters to clear the driveway, and a few minutes later, they again deployed pepper spray foggers at the people who were shining high-powered strobe lights in the officers' faces as they were attempting to push the crowd back from the driveway. One of the officers who had the strobe light directed at him experienced pain and disturbances in his vision. Now, normally, quote, Portland would be able to rely on the other division of Portland to assist with this. Okay, so like the special force, local force would be able to rely on them to come in. Now, FBS has been informed, though, that they won't. They're not going to come in. They'll only respond to life and safety situations, not anything immigration related, because they are a sanctuary city and they love illegals and they want to support the people who are out there attacking federal ICE officials. But when FPS called the Portland cops multiple times on September 9th to get assistance with a woman who was being physically assaulted by 13 protesters, they would not even intervene or assist. We'll only respond to personal life threats and danger. Oh, she's being attacked. Can you come help? No thanks. Eventually, they brought her onto the federal property for her safety and then pushed the protesters back so the woman could escape without the protesters following her. In June, Portland Police Chief Bob Day spoke publicly about avoiding any action. Okay, the chief of police came out and he said, we're not going to do anything that shows perceived or actual support for immigration agents. Not going to do it. In emails summarizing these incidents, officers report that no officers are available to respond to disturbances. The police have just abandoned. They sent an email saying Portland, quote, has no officers to go or call. You need help? We're not coming. We're not responding to the disturbance, and we have few to zero officers available. We're not coming over there for a verbal disturbance. You're on your own. So the court now writes this: the lack of support from the Portland police has forced FPS to rely almost exclusively on ICE and another team for assistance in preventing violent protesters from attacking the officers at the facility. FPS deployed 115 from other regions, all working 24/7 to maintain order at the federal building. And they have thus far spent over $2 million on overtime pay and expenses just to maintain order in the wake of these protests. Over $2 million. What was the damage done on January 6th again? Yeah. And then they spent a lot more on that in the aftermath. I think billions, because they stood the entire agency up to go after 1,500 people. Ridiculous. But in September, ICE detailed 3 SRT certified special agents in Portland. And if we have to be here, then we can't be elsewhere, right? And that's another tactical strategy too. If you have to keep your enemy, at bay, just distract them over here, make them spend all their resources on this region. And then that sucks up the resources from other regions that have more likelihood of being compliant with the deportations. So then, as we know, Trump came out on September 26th. After more than 3 months of disturbances, Trump said, enough. Homeland sent a memo to the DOD, now the DOW, requesting immediate sustained assistance. We need the National Guard. There are coordinated assaults by violent groups that are designated domestic terror organizations that are trying to smoke us out of the building and kill us and blind us. On September 27th, Trump then said, all right, Pete, let's go. Department of War contacted Oregon and they said, well, we're going to send them in there. But the governor of Oregon said, no, you're not. What do you think you are, the president? If we want illegal aliens to interfere with your deportations in federal law, we're allowed to do that. Come in and stop us. Well, here we are. Then Hegseth, after the rejection, issued a mobilization order. He said 200 members of the Oregon National Guard are coming in here for 60 days, taking his authority from the president. And of course, they did not like that. So then the state of Oregon and the city of Portland, they all sued. They said, you can't do this to us. They applied for a temporary restraining order, which the lower level judge granted. Now reversed, but she granted that back on October 4th. Now the temporary restraining order stops Pete Hegseth and Trump from implementing the National Guard. You can't send them out here. The judge said, well, it's outside the law. You don't have the permission to declare something bad happening here and deploy the National Guard. It's ultra virus. It's outside the scope of the law and it violates the 10th Amendment. And we have rights as states that are reserved to us to do our own law enforcement. And you can't come in here, Mr. President. Now, later that day, Oregon sought a second TRO. And after they entered its initial order, Trump and Hegseth sent in 100 federalized members of the California National Guard. And we remember this, they're kind of moving people around from different locations. Said, okay, well, if we can't activate the Portland National Guard, we already won in California. Newsom already tried all this. He lost. Obviously, it's federal buildings, federal property. We've got all sorts of statutes that allow this to happen. And the president is the commander in chief. We have the supremacy clause and the list goes on and on. But we've already beat Newsom. So they said, oh, okay, we'll just take the California Guard and just run them up here to Portland. Then another order came down. It said, you can't do that either, which is why this is also good because now we've got two states under the Ninth Circuit that have similar holdings. Now they say, all right, so they sued and they acknowledged that prior case. Now, before we get into it, they write, the Ninth Circuit, we note here that our analysis is also circumscribed by our legal conclusions in the Gouveia case. Precedent, we already decided in that one, so now we have to follow that. And you know what's also so sick about this is the lower level judge who issued the TRO knows that the Ninth Circuit also decided this. So why is she acting out of alignment with the Gavin Newsom holding? Because they're partisan hacks. First, in Newsom, where we already held this, the Ninth Circuit says, we already held that neither the political question doctrine nor the text precludes judicial review. Okay, so they hold the power and the courts will always do this. One argument is that they can't argue with president. If Trump says it's National Guard time, he's made the decision to do that. They cannot review it. There is no judicial review. Courts very rarely give that up. It's like their only power. So they said, well, we can hear it. And so we are going to hear this case. And that's what we're doing. And we had oral arguments on this too. And at the oral arguments, Trump's attorneys, they noted that they're going to challenge these conclusions on the merits of the Newsom case, right? So they're like, I don't even know what we're doing here because Newsom already said that we're going to win this, Oregon. But they agreed that we could view these holdings as binding and argued that we would win. Now, second, we also addressed this Ninth Circuit, whether we owe the president's determination any deference, right? There's some things you say it's the president's decision to make. A judge can't substitute their judgments for the president's judgment because if they do, then they're the president and they're not. In answering that question, we considered Congress's delegation of power to the president and the militia and all these things. And we held in the Newsom case that the review of the president's determination, if the president says, I got to deploy the National Guard, the president is in the best position to do that. They're in the pilot seat. They can see all of the knobs. They can see all of the data. All of the information they need is at their disposal so they can decide because they're, running the government. But the courts are not. So if there is going to be judicial review, it better be especially deferential. We must give a level of deference to the president, and the president's determination is very strong. But we also rejected the idea that Trump could just do this based on no evidence whatsoever. If something is obviously absurd or if it's made in bad faith, then we can't allow the president to do that. But if there's evidence, then we can't. Good. In sum, we concluded in the Newsom case that courts may review the president's determination just to make sure it's within the range of an honest judgment. But they also rejected the other arguments, saying you can't interfere with the president's ability to execute the laws. We held that while minimal interference with the execution of the law is not enough to invoke the deployment of the National Guard, it doesn't require that the president be completely precluded from executing the laws at all, or that it's inappropriate. So applying all of these, we turn to the factors and we show that President Trump is going to win and the National Guard can be deployed. So here's some more background. Now, the president's authority to federalize the Guard is statutory. It's in congressional law. It's not constitutional. The Constitution vests the power to call for a militia to the legislative branch. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 contain a bunch of powers of Congress listed in there. Now, Congress is very bad at doing a lot of those things, so they delegate execution over to the executive. Under that enumeration, Congress has enacted several statutes which delegate all of that power to the president, authorizing the president to federalize the National Guard in 3 circumstances. If there's an invasion, which there is right now, but they're not relying on that one. If there's a rebellion or danger of a rebellion, or if the president is unable with regular forces to execute the laws of the United States, the president can deploy the Guard. Now, Trump says that the circumstances at ICE establish that, well, 2 sections. First, this was a rebellion. This is a danger of a rebellion. They're attacking our federal facilities, and it authorizes the federalization of the Guard. We cannot, with regular forces, execute the laws, and so we need some help. And the court says, well, because we determine, as we did in the Gouveia case, that this law allows us to conclude that they're going to win, we don't need to do the same and analyze this other one because they're going to win on that one. So we don't need to analyze everything. This is good enough. Now, whether they are going to win depends upon whether the basis for deploying the forces meet the statutory requirements. Now, while the district court cited a highly deferential standard, saying as long in the Newsom case, so the judge, they're saying, took the Newsom case, and she says, I need to ask whether Trump's deployment to Portland reflects a colorable assessment of the facts and law within a range of honest judgment. Okay, so I don't know, judge could say, what exactly is going on in Portland, but the president seems like it's close, like there's something going on. The president's making the judgment that we need help. So that's good enough for me. It's honest. It's within the bounds. I might not agree with it. I might strongly agree with it, but that's the standard. Is it within a range of honest judgment? Or is it just like arbitrary and Trump just wants to go attack some politician or something like that? And you have strong evidence of that. Okay, so that's the standard. So she took that standard up at the lower court and then misapplied it. She took it and then erred by failing to actually apply it. So she could just find the outcome that she wanted. Instead, the lower level judge, she substituted her own assessment of the facts for the president's assessment of the facts. She says, I'm the president now. Eat it, Trump. Can't do that. This, writes the Ninth Circuit, is the opposite of the significantly deferential standard that applies to the president's decision. You can't substitute yourself for him. First, the lower level judge erred by determining that Trump's colorable assessment of the facts is limited by undefined temporal restrictions and by her own evaluation of the level of violence necessary to impact the execution of the law. She's like, well, they're peaceful protests, so it's not enough. Trump says it's violent. I say it's peaceful. I'm stronger than Trump, so I win. Thus, she determined that it would apply Newsom's colorable basis standard as they existed, quote, at the time, like at the time. So she just cuts off the days before his announcement and the days after. And she says, well, on that one day, things were very peaceful. Everything was perfect. The court then discounted the violent and disruptive events. So she just ignored June, July, August, and the resulting closure of the facility for 3 weeks. And she focused only on a few events in September. She's like, no. They weren't there at Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. All right, so things were fine. Well, that's because they were still hungover from the night before. Thus, the district court discounted most of the evidence all the way from June through September. Just wrote it all off. These judges are such scammers, man. The district court did not even define what period would be encompassed at the time. She's like, well, at the time. Instead, it cited Newsom. And she said that we were considering facts leading up to, and it could be days, it could be week. It's unclear whatever she considered, but it's wrong. She also made a mistake in characterizing the events in September. There were numerous instances of violence. So she cut off a bunch of months, but the month that she did include, September, she downplayed it. There were numerous instances of violent and disruptive behavior that she forgot about. On September 1, 200 protesters were disrupting operations at ICE. It's in the declaration. Same thing. Agents conducted several pushouts. They deployed gas. On September 6, 50 to 60 very active. It required them pushing them out in order to get their vehicles inside. On September 12th, large quantities of sticks and bats, not for a baseball game. On September 19th, there was a threat of a bomb. Another night, 50 protesters outside the facility. The black blockers were assaulting people. She forgot all of it, didn't want to read it, and just issued an order accordingly. Now, Section 12406, it contains no such limitations. You don't get to say that the president has to meet a certain standard in order to reach a level of violence that is acceptable to you. By its plain text, the law requires only a determination that the president is unable to execute the laws with regular forces. That's it. It delegates that decision to the president, and it does not limit the facts and circumstances that the president may consider in doing so. In fact, the inherently subjective nature of this evaluation, meaning the president has to make a judgment call, has to decide, based on what I'm seeing right now, this is what I would do. It demonstrates the president has the authority to weigh the factors. The president can and should consider the totality of the circumstances in making this decision. But rather than reviewing President Trump's determination with great deference, the lower level judge substituted its own determination of the relevant facts and circumstances because they think they are the president. This approach is error under Newsom, and she's bound by that case, and she's totally botched it. Our dissenting colleague takes a similar approach. Now, the dissent says that the law confines the president to the present circumstances because the statute lacks any forward-looking language. It's like, well, it's only like right now and back. You can't look into the future and prognosticate what's coming next. And so therefore, the president can't think about the future when issuing the deployment of the National Guard. It's just idiotic. That observation, however, does not resolve whether the president may also consider past event. In fact, all three statutory prongs are the same: prior, past, or present. And the president is entitled, in fact, duty-bound, to evaluate the entire context. What's been happening? What's happening now? What do I think is going to happen in the future? No. You can only consider what's happening in this 3 to 5 day window. Considering the totality, there is a colorable basis for the president to make the decision that he did. But the lower level judge also erred. She placed way too much weight on the statements that Trump made on social media. They get so mad. Trump posts on the internet. This one's actually coming to his favor now. The other lower judge got baited into it. She's like, well, he said this, and he said this, and he said this. The court interpreted Trump characterizing Portland as war ravaged as the equivalent of the president ignoring the facts on the ground. She's like, I live in Portland. It's not war ravaged at all. Now, as such, she then used that one statement. She says, well, if he's wrong about it being war ravaged, then everything else that he considered is also wrong. And she said it's not a war zone. And so she picked out one statement that she could disprove and falsify. It's not a war zone. There's no tanks driving around here. They got bats and sticks and laser pointers. And because Trump said that, everything else must be bad. And so she can overrule him. As such, she relied on these statements to disregard the other facts that they just listed out for us in great detail. And again, this was error for two reasons. For one, under Newsom, which we already decided, we consider whether the facts provide a colorable basis. Do any facts that they allege support their view? Even if the president may exaggerate the problem, this does not change the other facts that do provide a colorable basis to support his power. Now, for another reason, the social media post characterizing Portland as war ravaged may actually be reasonably viewed as part of his assessment under rebellion. And they're not even going to reach that. They don't need to. Now, moreover, this law cannot be analyzed solely based on external protest and violence. We also have to consider the executive Trump's internal assessment of its ability to enforce the laws. And you don't have any eyes into that, Judge. The record reflects that 115 FPS officers were diverted to Portland. These are FPS officers nationwide. Were all diverted back to Portland. The president may reasonably rely on this evidence. The dissent only reaches a different conclusion by talking about staffing difficulties, but Trump bears the burden and it's been met. It's a colorable assessment and you can't substitute that out. So this is error under Newsom. And third, the district court made a mistake and erred by concluding that the surge deployment established that regular forces were able to execute the laws. So this conclusion, if you're a judge, can only be reached by overlooking the record. I think this is pretty scolding type language. The judge, you're just ignoring the facts. We know that. It's nice to see the Court of Appeals saying that too. While the record establishes that they deployed many officers to Portland, nearly 25% of the agency's capacity for 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, these deployments were irregular. They're unsustainable. We got sworn declarations from a bunch of people too. The judge just ignored. Robert Cantu, he's the director of Federal Protective Services. Okay, so that's FPS. So FPS is a federal agency, not a local agency. And Camilla is a small federal agent pulled from everywhere, calling Portland for help. Portland doesn't show up to help. And there were other smaller subunits that existed too. The DHS field office director who oversees and directs ICE also said the following: while the surge and its inspectors help, it's not enough. The efforts to contain the violence have placed an unreasonable strain on us. If we have to continue to handle this, then we're going to have to pull them from all over the country in that one declaration that the lower level judge just ignored. So disregarding this uncontested evidence, she rejected Trump's argument. She says there's no basis for these deployments, but she turned the proper analysis on its head, the lower judge, by interpreting the modest improvements created by the surge. She said, well, things are getting better, so therefore there's no basis for this. She completely discounted that the surge was inherently irregular. That's why we needed a surge. We have to bring them in because there's a problem. The fact that you're acknowledging that there was a surge and saying that it solved everything is actually indicative of the problem, Judge. The district court accorded no deference to Trump and took over. And so thus, considering the totality of the circumstances, the Ninth Circuit writes, and applying the highly deferential standard of review, we conclude that President Trump's assessment of the situation in Portland, specifically the threat to federal personnel and property, reflects good judgment, a colorable assessment of the facts within the range of honest judgment. Blown out, lower judge. Thus, they're going to win. And your other claims are terrible. You're trying to argue that the 10th Amendment prevents the National Guard. They say, here, we've already concluded. They've already met the statutory definition. So the statute says that they can do this, so it's not a 10th Amendment violation. And apart from the likelihood of success on the other matters, they ask, are you going to be irreparably injured absent a stay? And here in Newsom, in the prior case, they've already solved this. We concluded that both irreparable harm and public interest weigh in favor of Trump and America. They have an uncontested interest in protecting federal agents and property and the faithful execution of the law, yes, even against illegal alien invaders. Here, just like Newsom, the undisputed facts show protesters damaged a federal building, made it close down for 3 weeks, tried to burn the building down, placed chains on its doors, attempted to breach the front door of the building, broke the front glass door, threw objects at the building, including rocks, sticks, and a mortar, launched M80 fireworks at federal officers, assaulted federal officers, laser beams, and doxing. Now, the government's interest in preventing this is significant. We have to safeguard the normal functioning of our government, and it is legitimate to do that. But the dissent, they say, well, Trump doesn't face any harm because the second TRO, which is not before us, still prevents him from deploying the National Guard. But this argument lacks merit. The district court stated that it granted the second TRO based on the same legal reasoning in the first TRO. So we're invalidating the first TRO as well. Trump is correct that the first TRO and the second TRO, they rise or fall together on the merits, and the second one's going to get nuked too. While whether the second TRO could be extended to preclude the National Guard is a separate issue from California. But this provides no basis to say that the president is not harmed, America is not harmed when these maniacs are attacking our agents. So again, the state of Oregon and Portland, they argue, well, the other factors weigh in our favor. They say, okay, so what if they have interest in their buildings? They're not going to be irreparably harmed, but they are. They say the record is showing this is completely unsustainable. In Portland, you're not willing to help the government, so they win. Now, finally, the state also argues that they are going to have sovereign injury if the illegals come out. No, we're going to have sovereign victory when the illegals are gone. As we stated in Newsom, while they do have interest in their states, it's already been delegated. Okay, it's in the Constitution. Constitution says call forth the militia. They delegated that over to the president, and Trump's going to win. Because we have concluded that Trump is likely to succeed on the merits by successfully invoking the law, your arguments, Oregon, Portland, and the rest of the new Cs and the blue states, your arguments fail. And so for those reasons, we, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, hereby grants Trump's motion for a stay pending appeal. We've got a concurring decision and a dissenting decision, but a very nice victory for President Trump, and just a beautiful decision there because it just scolded the lower level judge who was completely erroneous in her decision. So the National Guard will be deployed. Now we're going to start to see the circuits split on this. So 7th Circuit and other circuits, Chicago and other locations will continue to fight on this, but we've got the 9th Circuit now 2 for 2. California, Oregon, stop enabling your sanctuary policies and supporting your protesters who are attacking federal law enforcement officers, just keeping your hands clean of it because it really is your constituency. Join Team America, help the federal agents protect themselves, and we won't have to deploy the National Guard. But if you are too beholden to your illegal alien invader constituency, the National Guard will be deployed as is constitutionally permissible, as seen here by the 9th Circuit. So we're going to keep our eye on this one and more, my friends. Thank you for subscribing and joining as we do. I think this will probably ultimately go up to the Supreme Court, but as it stands right now, big victory for President Trump and America.